Hello, YouTubers, friends, and compatriots, bootlicker, shills, deathly, serfs, peasants, vassals, minions, meat sacks, leakers. I'm usefully welcome. So let's take a look at this whole fiasco about the Yemen war plan leaks to the Atlantic, because it has a lot of components. And the first component I'd like to talk about is the fact that this has a lot of earmarks of blueprint for Democratic attacks on Trump going all the way back to 2016. And that's partially where a story is blown way out of proportion, and there's a lot of feigned outrage and demands for resignations and demands for investigations and the like. And so we've seen this a bunch of times before, and a lot of times it involves something we're seeing again, a leaker that perhaps could be a Judas or somebody working behind the scenes to sabotage Trump. So that's the first thing I want to point out, that this is a blueprint that we've seen before. But that said, on the surface, of course, it looks really bad. And that brings up another component, the fact that the media and the politicians, the Democratic politicians, can all splash these headlines about these inept, despicable, corrupt actions by Trump and the Republicans. And whether it's true or not, they pick the most damning headlines and blow it way out of proportion and make it a big deal. And that's something we see in politics on both sides. So that's another thing that this smacks of. The headlines are already out there, the damage is already done. So no matter what comes out in the end, in the liberal base, it's already in their mind that here's more corruption and outrages by the Republicans. So that's just part of the territory. So looking at the real story, of course, we have the fact that these Yemen war plans were leaked to someone at the Atlantic, and now the Trump administration and Hagelseth, the military director of Department of Defense, is having to do a lot of fast talking and backtracking. And of course, we have some issues there. Of course, Hagelseth is at some points appears to be lying, and then Trump, of course, is saying that's another witch hunt. And there's some truth to that, but it doesn't look too good. But again, there's some other components. The fact is that it didn't really affect anything. The attacks were launched the next day, and they were leaks. And that brings up the topic of leaks. So we have a bunch of pundits pointing out rightly that Hillary Clinton had this entire email scandal, vastly larger than this is by exponentially. And of course, that wasn't an issue to the liberals, but they're grasping onto this like it's a big deal. And then even Hillary Clinton has come out and talked about how terrible this is, this happened. And so that's pretty rich, but we've come to expect the staggering hypocrisy from our leaders and our politicians. And then Matt Taibbi pointed out something that is worth noting as well, is that everyone's outraged by the leaks, but nobody's outraged by attacks in a new war on Yemen. And that's how it goes now too. Nobody seems to care about these basically illegal wars or these stepped up military actions, but they do care about supposed corruption or ineptness by the Republicans. In this case, it becomes a partisan struggle. And that's a big part of this too. It's a partisan thing. If this had happened to Biden, of course, the liberal press would have played it down and would have made a number of excuses. But since it's Trump, it's going to be splashed all over the headlines for the next week or two. And the other part of this too is that how convenient that it ended up being the Atlantic. They're completely pro-war, and they become a total mouthpiece for the Democrats. And that's unfortunate. The Atlantic used to be a very reputable magazine and news source, and now they post some of the most outrageous anti-Trump partisan pieces that are out there. And so it does make me scratch my head like, well, gee, of all the people that it would end up in the hands of, the Atlantic. And then there's all the talk about the service, the encrypted service that they used. and called Signal, and this chat was being done. And so now we have also indications that a uh, advisor to Michael Waltz or someone who worked for him, either accidentally or on purpose, put the Atlantic editor, and I have to remind you too, it's the editor, not just some low journalist at the Atlantic. It went right to the editor, which is also kind of suspicious. But the idea that somebody that worked for Michael Waltz put the address of the Atlantic uh, in this chat, and so that's one of the more suspicious things I see here. It's very plausible that somebody sabotaged this chat in Signal, and somebody that worked for Waltz, and somebody that wanted to create some damage for Trump. And so I find that very plausible. We'll see what happens as the story moves forward. And Hegeseth, instead of admitting that he fucked up, or that Waltz fucked up, of course, is attacking Goldberg. And that's probably not a good strategy. It makes it look all the more worse for him. But there's some legitimacy in that, because somebody should question Goldberg and the Atlantic for posting all this material. And they posted a couple of batches now of more damning material. And it shows just how partisan the Atlantic is, for one thing. It doesn't show very responsible journalism in a way. And so Goldberg is a legitimate target. So one has to question, particularly when he's the editor of the Atlantic, and he's pro-war, and he's very pro-Democrat, and very anti-Trump. So that's another component in it. And then it's interesting that the leaks show that J.D. Vance was not on board with this attack. And so that's encouraging. Shows that J.D. Vance, aside from his public persona, is definitely looking out for American interests, and thought that stepping up Yemen attacks is ill-advised, which in a way it is. Let's remember that the U.S. supported Saudi Arabia's war on Yemen, stretching back, what, 20 years now? And Obama bombed Yemen, and Biden bombed Yemen, and Trump bombed Yemen in his first term. And just bombing Yemen is really not going to change anything. But of course, now we have a much larger U.S. presence in the Red Sea, and there's talks about sending a message to Iran and stepping up the war on Yemen. And as I pointed out in a video I did last week, this is a new war. And this is proving it, the fact that everything is being stepped up quite a bit. And as I suspected, Trump is going to be very adamant about taking care of this in the strongest terms. So that's a part of this, and we'll have to see how this affects ongoing negotiations with Iran. But I guess my main point is that nobody really knows what's going on. It obviously has a partisan angle to it that we can't ignore. It has a bad smell to it, in the fact that somebody might have purposely leaked this to sabotage the Trump administration, and we can't rule that out. And the headlines are already out there and have done the damage. And now the Democrats, of course, can be totally outraged. And we also have GOP members, of course, that are expressing outrage. But a lot of them have to, and a lot of them politically viable for them to express some kind of outrage. And we also have to remember that there's a lot of GOP status and status quo who definitely are after Trump as well, just like they were during his first term. So these are all factors we have to take into consideration. And the other part of this, too, is that some pundits have suggested this is a psyop, and the whole idea is to sabotage Trump and convince people that this was an inept or corrupt or a total fuck up by Trump and Hegeseth, and when in reality it's a purposeful subterfuge, and that's something I just talked about as well. Somebody lower in the chain putting the Atlantic's editor in this signal chat Rolodex, basically, so that this would happen. And so those are all the things I think need to be taken into consideration. The fact is, nobody really knows what's happened. We'll have to see if more information came out. But in the meantime, it's a very convenient clusterfuck for the Democrats to make huge attacks on Trump and Hegelseth, including the call for resignations and smearing the Trump administration. And that's basically what it's all about in the scheme of things. It's a relatively small thing, but as far as the media and the Democrats are concerned, they're going to milk it for all it's worth. So anyway, it's just a dog and pony show, in my estimation, and we'll see how this plays out. But the bottom line, as I was alluding to, is that nobody really knows. But for political purposes, it's succeeding in a big way. I'm useful to it. Don't you be one too?